Today is November 14th, 2018, and I'm interviewing Darrell Tucker at the Illinois State Library. May I call you Darrell?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Please do.
Darrell is 71 years old, having been born on November 29th, 1946. And my name is Sue Burkholder, and I will be the interviewer. So for the recording, would you please state what wartime and branch of service that you served in?
I served during the Vietnam War and the Air Force.
Okay. Well, let's start out with just a little bit about yourself, if you would, please, where you were born, and maybe a little bit about your parents and their occupations.
Okay. I was born in Topeka, Kansas. When I was about a year and a half old, my mother, father, and brother moved to Twin Falls, Idaho. We moved into a one-room log cabin, similar to what Lincoln grew up in. And when I was about 2.5 years old, my father went back to Kansas. So my mother, brother, and I lived in that log cabin until I was 8. My father's occupation, I really did not know my father. I met my father maybe after he went back to Kansas like 3 or 4 times, so I can't expand on that a little bit. My mother raised 2 boys and remarried when I was 8. My stepfather and brother and I took the log cabin and tore it apart, added on 2 bedrooms, running water, dug a basement by hand, and he used to enjoy beating us, my brother and I. There's many days that I went to school and could not sit down. In fact, when I was 10 years old, I pretty well knew everybody in Twin Falls, Idaho that drank beer, because I collected beer bottles, and I'd get on my bicycle on Sunday and go around the town and collect beer bottles. And the beer truck would come to our house once a month and pick up almost 50 cases of beer bottles. So we scrimped and scrounged. She divorced my stepfather when I was 12 and never remarried again, had 2 more boys. I have 2 brothers that still live in Idaho. One lives in Boise, Idaho. The other one still lives in Twin Falls, Idaho, and my mother is dead. She lived in that house her entire life and died, 6 or 7 years ago. So that's kind of my history. My mother cleaned houses. We grew up on welfare, but after a while, I started work at a country club when I was 13 down in the Snake River Canyon, and worked down there every day after school until I go to work like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and work until 11 o'clock at night every day after school, work all day Saturday and Sundays. So I worked a lot, was not that involved with school, but I had a desire to do more, and so I took the tough courses. Took the physics, and they didn't offer calculus at that time, and graduated from Twin Falls, Idaho in 1965. I went to a junior college after that and continued to work at the country club. Actually helped put together one of the Holiday Inn there, because the manager left the country club and wanted me to become the vice innkeeper or whatever, but I stayed at the country club. And there was a lady at the country club that was on the draft board, and she kind of kept me in touch. Well, I got a D in history, and at that time, if you got a grade below C in college, you had to prove that you were college material. I did not take the test, because I figured if they wanted me, come get me. Well, the lady on the draft board told me like 4 days before a letter was being sent that it was in the mail. So I joined the Air Force. When the recruiter for the Air Force asked me what I wanted to do, I said, I'll be a cook. He said, nope, you can't be a cook. I said, but I'm a chef at a country club. Nope, can't be a cook. What else you want to do? Well, I can type pretty good. I'll be a clerk. And he says, nope, you can't be a clerk either. Well, of course, you take this test to determine what your aptitude capability is for the military. And I guess I didn't know this time, but I guess I scored pretty good in electronics. And I did. On my DD-14, it says I scored like a 95 in electronics. So the recruiter said, you're going into electronics. And I told him, I don't know anything about electronics. The only thing I knew about electronics was how to wire a log cabin or a converted house. We'll teach you. So I went to basic training. I joined the Air Force in 1966. Went to basic training at Lackland Air Force Base. And Vietnam was just heating up, just starting to get really hot and heavy. And they give you a little book in basic training is to pick what courses you want. On the right-hand side is the length of the course, and on the left-hand side is some fancy description. Well, I concentrated on the right-hand side and found a school that was like 50 weeks long, almost a year. Turns out it was instrument trainer instructor. So after basic training, I was transferred or went to Chanute Air Force Base. And at Chanute Air Force Base, I learned about electronics. And I also learned how to fix and fly like 5 different instrument trainers. Props, single engine jet, dual engine jet, and a supersonic jet. After I graduated in 1967, I believe that's right, from the training at Chanute Air Force Base, I got orders to go to Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. I didn't have a clue where Lubbock, Texas was. So I get out a map, and I drive in my little Volkswagen Bug. Well, while I was at Chanute Air Force Base, I'd been there like 3 weeks, and I received a call from my uncle. And I never met him, but maybe once or twice, didn't really know him. And he invited me to come down to Charleston for Thanksgiving. I asked where Charleston was. I said, man, I can't go to South Carolina. That's too far away. He says, no, Charleston, Illinois. So I went down and socialized with my aunt and uncle and 4 daughters of his, my nieces. And they tied me up through a blind date with my wife-to-be. And here in a few days, we're going to be married 50 years. So I met my wife while I was at Chanute Air Force Base. She was going to Eastern Illinois University. I then went down to Texas, and we got engaged after I went down to Texas. And had been down there, I don't know, almost a year, 6 months, and we set a wedding date. When I went to Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas, I said, okay, I'm ready to start fixing them. And they said, no, you're not going to fix the simulator. You're going to teach them how to fly it. I don't know how to fly it that well myself. We'll teach you. So for about 6 weeks, while at Reese Air Force Base, I learned how to train pilots, student pilots, and how to fly the T-38 aircraft. The T-38 is a little supersonic jet. That's the same one that the astronauts fly around in. And I taught 4 pilots or students a day how to fly by and navigate by instruments in the aircraft. I taught student pilots from all over the world. 4 students a day, 4 o'clock in the morning till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was a great job. I really enjoyed it. It was very challenging. Like some of the students, I'll never forget, I had a student who majored in animal husbandry. Sitting him in a cockpit and teaching him kind of the math behind navigation, he really had a rough time figuring what the hypotenuse of a right triangle is about, because that's part of navigation. But I taught pilots. I even had an astronaut one time come in for refresher training, and I had to challenge him to how to fly the aircraft by instruments. So I can continue if you want me to.
Well, before you do, let me ask you a couple of questions. Did you have any other family members that were in the service?
My father was in the service. I'm told, but I really never knew it because it was before me. My brother was in the Air Force. He was a weatherman stationed in Greenland and I'm not sure where else. My uncle was the one in Illinois, in Charleston. But the rest of my family I really don't know a whole bunch about. So that's pretty well the extent but my brother was in for 4 years in the Air Force.
Let's see, and you said you enlisted. And when you left for basic training, was your family okay with that, or did they have misgivings, or was it just pretty much just I'm going and you went?
Well, like I said, I worked at this country club, so my mother, from when I was 13 till I was 19,
Mm-hmm.
she just kicked me out of bed in the morning, say go to school, and I grew up young, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
I became very mature because of the responsibilities I had. In fact, when my mother married my father, my stepfather, he charged rent for us to live in the house, my brother and I. So when I left to go in the service, it was like a new life, a new beginning, a challenge for, I don't know, improving my life.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I would have stayed in Twin Falls, Idaho, I'd probably still be a cook. And as it is, it gave me focus, it gave me a drive, and I'm glad I went in. But my family, my mother, she just, congratulations, and I went back home after about 6 months and picked up my Volkswagen Bug, and she stayed in Idaho. My father continued to live in Kansas, and so there was not really a family tie there. It was just it was a career builder for me.
Sure. Just a little bit about basic training. When you were in basic training, did you have any memorable instructors or anything that stands out, a story you can tell us about that?
Well, everybody relates to their drill instructor, and this, my first experience with the drill instructor getting in my face, and I couldn't march. I don't have any rhythm. And being tall, I have to march in the front row, front right corner. That's the tallest position. So I'm leading the flight. And he's calling the cadence, and I cannot march worth a diddle darn. So I got demoted and kicked back into even though I was sticking up in the middle, but I did eventually learn how to march. I met some wonderful other men, young men. Our barracks was like half California and half the rest of the country, and you kind of teased the Californians. But I lived in the World War II double stack barracks. There was 60 of us in the barracks, and so my memorable time is the barracks. And if you got them, light them. Learning how to march was a real challenge. I was not athletic. I probably would not made a Marine, but I wanted to use my brain. That's why I joined the Air Force. The basic training was short. It's only like 6 or 8 weeks, as I recall. A challenge.
Okay. All right. So you talked a little bit about then when you went on and how you got into where you're at. Just was that pretty much your the only job you had, the training, or was there any other area that they had you in, or doing any other things during your time?
No, that was pretty well it. My job was to teach students. And of course, once in a while you had to have your shift wax the floors and clean and do all the cleaning, and that's part of it. Part of the reason I got out was I'm a professional and teaching officers how to fly. And 10 minutes before my shift is over, after teaching 4 students, the CO would come up and say, "Get your shift to break down and wax the floors today." And I'm tired. And so it was kind of an ownership thing. I can tell you to do whatever I want to, whenever I want to. And so my other job was maybe cleaning the barracks and cleaning the facility.
What did you do for enjoyment and relaxation?
I really didn't have any because, like I said, I go to work for the Air Force at 4 o'clock in the morning, work until 1 o'clock, and then I found another job. So I went to work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at a print shop in Lubbock, Texas, and I worked till 10 o'clock at night. So I was working 2 8-hour-a-day jobs, and I didn't relax at all. I never did know how to play because growing up the way I did, I worked all the time. So what are you going to do from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until the next day? Right. I'm going to find another job.
Oh, let's see. So then tell me again, where was your service at? Where were you teaching at?
Reese Air Force Base,
It
Lubbock,
was-
Texas.
Okay, it was still in Lubbock, okay.
Yep.
All right. So, what about friendships? Did you develop any friendships in the service, and have you continued those?
I graduated from Chanute with, after the almost 50 weeks, our class was, I believe there was 9 of us in the class, so we bonded pretty strongly. We'd help each other with the course and the studying and whatever. After about 15 years, 20 years of being out, I have a picture, and on the back of it, all of us' names, phone numbers, and addresses. And after 20, 25 years, I picked that out and I tried to contact them. I did get a hold of 2 or 3 of the parents, but well, in case one of them he didn't want anyone to know where he lived. So I was not successful recontacting those people. My one very, very special friend was my best man. He was from California. In fact, we went out after we got out of the service and visited with them after he got out too. I tried to recontact him, and I found out that there's about 120 Dennis E. Sullivans that live in California. So I have not been able to get a hold of him. He was a very, very special friend to me. But then I didn't live on base after that. Some of my co-workers, I'd graduated from Chanute with me, but I never really got in touch with any of the co-workers that I had either. So when I got out of the service, I got out of the service.
All right. What about any medals or citations that you earned during your service?
Well, I was Airman of the Month for Reese Air Force Base one time.
And what were the qualifications for that, or what brought that about?
Well, just a nomination for my CO, and my performance ratings, my co-workers, and the student pilots, I think, fed that a little bit as a recommendation to my NCO, my non-commissioned officer. And I was very proud of that. I got a picture still of when they took me of when I was Airman of the Month of the base, and I'm very, very proud of that. I've been at Chanute about a year when I got that. Not Chanute, but Reese Air Force Base. Of course, the marksmanship thing and a couple things for being an instructor. That's not a medal, but it's a certificate that you get.
Sure.
And that's pretty well. I got other awards because I had students coming in saying they'd come over an hour early and try to sign up to get me as their instructor. So I was very proud that they wanted me to teach them.
Yeah. What about some memorable students? I mean, you just told one story. Can you think of any others that you would like to share?
Well, some of the students, I challenge them in various ways. For instance, one student, the T-38 aircraft, if you lose both of your engines, you eject immediately. You don't think about anything else, you eject. So part of the training was to fail both engines and make sure they ejected. One student, and you only did it like one time, but one student, I failed both engines and I didn't hear the thump of simulating his ejection, and he'd look, there's a little hole in the side of the cockpit, and he looks out the hole at me, he says, "Well, what do you want me to do now?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. You're dead." "What do you mean?" I said, "You should have ejected immediately." "Oh, yep, you're right. So, and some students would come in and I'd give them a simulation of a bird strike, and I'd walk around the cockpit and hit on the cockpit and, "Whoa, what was that?" I said, "Well, you just hit a bird. What are you going to do? You lost an engine." So they'd have to recover from that situation. Some of them would bring me cookies because at that time, help me out here a little bit. The Cookie Monster was going on TV, and I would play with them a little bit, relax them a little bit, be the cookie monster, and they'd bring me a cookie. So, but I had students that, one of the worst students I ever had were Iranians. Most of those did not pass, but the policy at that time was any foreign student from the Middle East, you passed. They'd go back home and they'd get their own airplane, and if they couldn't fly it, that wasn't our problem. They were here to learn about the basics of a flight simulation. And the Iranians had a real struggle, and the language barrier was probably a contributor to that, but in order to do it, they were supposed to have fluent English, and fluent in a cockpit is a little different. Most of them did not pass, but they did pass. We weren't allowed to fail them. And of course, the astronaut, I didn't have to teach him anything. I remember when I had him in the cockpit, there's 2 hydraulic gauges in the very lower corner left of the cockpit, and I was starting to bleed off the hydraulic pressure, and it's something that you shouldn't even notice until it get the alarm. But he turned to me and he, "What are you doing to my hydraulic pressure?" "Oh, well, I'm just seeing how if you know about it." And the idea is you look over the entire cockpit and cross-check all your instruments to keep your status of your aircraft, and I hadn't failed it much at all, so he was an ace at flying that airplane. And one time I did get the privilege of flying the aircraft. The pilot was in the front seat, I was in the back seat. He lined it up on the runway. As soon as it took off, he says, "It's your aircraft, wake me up when you get to minimums." So we flew from Lubbock, Texas to Amarillo. I did, and all by instruments, because I don't know about roads and all that stuff. And when I got to minimums, he asked me, he says, "Okay, it's my aircraft. Do you want to go into an afterburner climb?" "Sure." So we went from ground level to 30,000 feet in roughly 7 seconds, i.e. straight up. I didn't have a G-suit on. He kept asking me, "How you doing back there?" And there's a big ball in the middle of the instrument. It's called the ADI. And when that starts shrinking and your vision starts shrinking, I said, "The ADI is starting to get small." He says, "Okay, I'll level it off." And he just went, boom. And unfortunately, I had eaten not too much before then, and of course you have to wear the mask, the oxygen mask, and so we went back to Air Force Base with, anyway, that was an experience.
Let's see, and what rank did you achieve while you were in?
Staff sergeant.
Okay.
About 3.5 years. Made staff sergeant in minimum time.
Just some little mundane things, but what about how do you recall the food, how you enjoyed that, or
Well, by going to work at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd eat breakfast at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 o'clock in the morning. That's the only meal I ate all day, was breakfast, because when I went to work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was expected to work from 2 until 10 and no time to eat. So I loaded up on breakfast, and this is before I got married. And of course, after I got married, food was at home. The food on the base was breakfast was great. I ate 6 to 8 eggs and just really chow down big time. The only problem with only eating one meal and most of its eggs is usually around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It causes your stomach to emit, it caused a problem. So, but the food was great. Basic training. I remember first day there, AF 188-01737. You had to have that memorized, or you didn't eat. And so every time you go through the chow line, you had to announce your serial number. And the food in basic training was not the country club steaks, but it was very good food.
Let's see. There's one other thing here.
I'll tell you a little bit more story.
Yes, please, go ahead.
When I got out of the service, my wife at that time said, "You are going back to school." So after 4 years of being out of school, basically college, I went back to school at Texas Tech University into electrical engineering, walked into a calculus class, and everybody in the class was 19 years old, and I'm 23 years old. Talk about a challenge to go into such a rigorous field after being in the service for 4 years but the instructors, the professors were very understanding and appreciative of my service, worked with me and helped me. And in 1973, I graduated with an electrical engineering degree from Texas Tech University. Went to Mount Vernon, Illinois, where I was there for about 3 years as an assistant service area engineer. From there, I went to headquarters in Decatur, Illinois. While in Decatur, about 8 months being in Decatur, I was walking by Human Resources, and they said, "Are you still interested in getting involved with nuclear?" So I got involved with the Clinton Power Station construction and startup and operations. After being nuked in 1978, my job at that time was security, write the security plan and guard training qualification plan. Well, that was done, and the plant manager says, "You're going to California." So I went to California for almost a year, packed up my wife, our Irish setter, and our 2 daughters, and we went to San Jose, California for close to a year to put the control room together for the power plant, and then came back. Worked with a lot of fantastic Navy people, a lot of people, nuclear power operators, our nuclear Navy, and so it's like rejoining the military, and worked in nuclear power for 40 years. So my career, my focus, my military background gave me the discipline to try to hang in there in college, because it was tough with 2 kids, and my wife had a problem with a knee thanks to me one time, and I was taking statics, and I flunked statics because it was, and my professor, the dean of the electrical engineering school, I said, "I'm not going to make it. I got to change." He said, "Nope, I'm not going to let you out." So that was it was a career maker, and like I said, the military gave me focus, gave me direction, gave me discipline, because I had discipline, I think, because of my background growing up and my stepfather, but well, the military gave me a more of a field direction. Electronics, I don't know anything about that.
And did that change, of course?
Yeah.
So, was it pretty easy for you when you did get out of the service to switch to civilian life?
It was. I have a picture of me signing. I've been out of the service maybe 3 weeks, and the journal, the newspaper for Texas Tech University, showed me registering for school, and I had a little baby on my tummy, and a little girl in my hand, because my wife was teaching. So I'm registering with 2 babies, 2 children, and they thought, "Man, the article is bewildered with registration," and it was so no. For me to transition from the military to private life wasn't difficult at all. Transitioning to college was a challenge, but life, no. And I kept working at the print shop after I got out of the service. So I remember after about a year and a half, I was working at night at the print shop and going to school in the daytime, and I said, "I gotta quit. I can't do both." And they said, okay, we understand. Taught somebody how to run this machine a folding machine that I worked on, and after about 3 weeks, the guy quit, and he said, "We gotta have you back. We gotta have you back." I said, "Whatever you can do." So on weekends, I'd go to work Friday at the print shop after school all week. And then Friday night, go to work at the print shop and work until Saturday morning, like, 10 o'clock in the morning, come home and sleep, and then Saturday night, go back to the print shop. I put in almost 30 hours just on the weekends at this print shop. But when they brought me back, I said, "I got to have more money, so we'll double your pay." and that happened twice. We'll double your pay. So I went from 50 cents an hour to like $3, $4 an hour. But it was it helped. GI Bill, thank God for the GI Bill. That helped me and was part of the stimulus for me to go back to school, because that's money that's available. Use it as a veteran, and whenever you're discharged, use that GI Bill.
Yes. All right. Have you joined veterans organizations? I can see from your. Tell us a little bit about what you are involved with.
Well, right now I'm the department commander for Illinois, so I'm the man, the head man for Illinois, and came up through the chairs and AMVETS, been active in AMVETS primarily after retiring. I retired 4 or 5 years ago from nuclear power industry and went up through the chairs. I'm also the deputy provost marshal for the state of Illinois, for the nation. So I'm one of the national officers also. Was very fortunate to be recently selected as one of the Honor 200 because of my activity and my wife's activity with the community. To give an example of the activity outside of my social, we've made 3-4 trips to Quebec, Canada, taken a French class. My wife taught French, and we made one trip from Lubbock, Texas, with a 9-passenger station wagon with 11 people in it to Quebec, Canada. So I'm very much involved with the community, the church, and with my involvement with the AMVETS is I'm the finance officer with our post in Clinton, Illinois. When I started to get involved, I was challenging the finance officer about, okay, here's how much we got in the bank, here's how much we have spent, what did we spend it on? And it was like, I don't have to report that. Well, wait a minute, we need to be accountable here. Well, I quit. So by default, I became the finance officer, and we went from the point of having checks bounce almost all the time to having a pretty good fund. We did receive a grant from the state of Illinois to get a building in Clinton, Illinois. And we have a building. We're still waiting for the money from the grant. We've got a fake check, but our goal is to have a veterans facility in Clinton, Illinois, that a veteran officer from the state or a VSO, veteran service officer, can come to Clinton, Illinois, and sit down with veterans and talk to them one-on-one, because, well, the Legion doesn't have any facility for that. The VFW they're a bar, basically, and we want a building for veterans to come to and talk to the VSO, and that's what that's about. And the building's paid for now. We're still waiting for our money, but I'm very active in the fundraising. I used to send out letters to the community, businesses seeking income, and now with the state, I'm trying to help us turn around for our finances there too.
So as soon as you receive the money from the state, that will complete your fundraising?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so
yeah, it was 3 years ago that the grant was approved, and we've been waiting for 3 years. But last year, the capital budget was approved by the governor, but the money hasn't been authorized to be distributed yet for the capital grants.
Right. Yeah. So that project will then, once the funds are raised, you'll build the building, and that'll be then in place. That's
we're going to add on to our existing building. Right now, we're we bought a building that's like 900 square feet, a little bitty building that was a hair salon, and we borrowed some money. We had some money saved. Since then, we paid off the loan, and now we're just waiting for that money so we can add on to the building and finish that project. We had a gravel parking lot, and a gentleman was so gracious. They built a new grocery store next door, and the guy that did the paving, I approached him and said, we really need some gravel to get rid of the puddles in our front, and the paver came over and paved our lot. So we've been very, very fortunate.
Nice. All right, let's see. So I know you've talked a little bit about it and how what you learned in the military and the focus it gave you carried over into your civilian life. But is there anything else from your military experiences that you would want to talk about and how it affected your life after military?
Well, Vietnam was a very difficult war. When I was at Chanute, I went to Champaign a couple times, and we had to wear a uniform off base. And I remember distinctively being spit on a couple times, and that really hurt. So today, when people say thank you for your service, it means a great deal, a great deal. So there's good experiences and bad experiences from the military, but I wouldn't change it. I'd do it again because I love my country and I love that flag. And if I struggle with today with people desecrating the flag or not respecting the national anthem. They have a right to speak, but that's one thing that every American should stand up and say, salute that flag. Sorry.
It's all right. Did your military experience I realize you weren't actually in combat, you were teaching those who would be, but did that experience influence your thinking about war or the military in general? How did it? I should say, how did it?
I'm a firm believer that things like the Vietnam War over there, what's that have to do with our country? People want to be free. People have the right to be free. The people in Iraq and Afghanistan, if they want to be free, not under a dictatorship. And there was times when, and there's still times when I think, well, our taxes are going so high, why are we trying to free the world? We're the sole spending a lot of money trying to do that, sending our young people and ladies and men over to fight in a war that's thousands of miles away. But they want to be free, and we should be helping them be free. That's our responsibility as Americans. So yeah, I struggle with wars. Nobody wants to see anyone go to war, but we have a responsibility.
Okay. Well, do you have any last comments you would like to share, perhaps speaking to the generations who are coming up now, or the generations to come who might see or hear your interview?
Well, I've been speaking at a grade school and I gave a speech like last Sunday about the responsibilities of a veteran. A veteran never stops serving. And it's our responsibility to go carry the message about each of us, not just veterans, but primarily the veterans, have a responsibility to go tell people about what we did and their responsibility to be, I'll say, Americans. That never ends. It should never end, especially for a veteran. They should continue to serve. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for coming and agreeing to share your story. I really appreciate it, and I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're very welcome.